If he shows up, he can assume the chair. First up is roll call vote. Madam Clerk?
Yes, Mr. Vice Chair. Commissioner Leitner? Commissioner Walls? Here. Commissioner Rice? Here. Commissioner Duckham? Commissioner Tompkins?
Here.
Commissioner Mahoney?
Present.
Commissioner Williams?
Present.
Chair Elwell?
Here.
Chairman Shotwell?
Thank you, Amanda. Next up is public comments. If you can step up to the mic, you have 3 minutes to address the board. Just give us your name. Morning.
Good morning. Your potential actions here regarding assuming control of 911, they're concerning on several fronts. This issue seemed to be decided long before any of you walked into this meeting, with no dialogue, no transparency, and no public discussion. You've already been rebuffed by numerous fire chiefs and police chiefs who told you they don't support this move. This came as a surprise last Wednesday when I discovered a number of things being codified in county policy regarding 911 director and 911 as its own department. Throughout the past many years, our office has corrected any concerns that any of you had. We completed and rolled out a new state-of-the-art 911 center in 2014, marketed and passed an increased 911 surcharge to adequately fund the center when you assured us it would remain under our supervision. We increased staffing levels, created, trained, and certified shift leaders for direct supervision, and I myself have personally, at your behest and your request, dedicated the last 2 years of my life to the rollout, planning, training, and ultimate use of a $7.5 million communication system. Certainly now this feels like we were all used to clear the big hurdles so your annexation of 911 could be without major projects or obstacles outstanding. The Sheriff's Office under Lieutenant Hammond has leveraged numerous technologies to increase service, speed call delivery, and enhance delivery of the services to the citizens and for safety of the first responders. Our office listens to and engages our public safety partners, asks for the recommendations, and changes things based on the recommendations. This certainly doesn't sound like some operation that's in drastic need of rescue or changing. The saddest part about all this is the very talented 911 staff, they don't deserve this type of treatment. Many of us throughout our careers, including myself, have trusted these great men and women as our lifeline. We've done so with great confidence. For these people on the front line who wear their bunker gear, who wear their Kevlar and rush into danger without hesitation, they need to know that their lifeline is there. Your actions here are going to shake that. To have politics inserted into this vital function is far scarier than most first responders on the street could ever imagine. These brave people in the 911 center and on the front lines don't want any part of these politics. They want trusted resources to do their job. Whatever your decision is here today, I hope that you contemplate that with the gravity, the seriousness, and the responsibility that comes with taking ownership of 911, both the good and the bad, and what those first responders on the street expect.
Peter Bormuth. Libya, Somalia, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan. These are the countries where the U.S. is at war. We either have ground troops there or we are authorizing air and drone strikes on the people. Plus 60 other countries where we have advisors on the ground on the war on terror. This has gone on through 3 administrations. $5.3 trillion have been spent, with estimates of a price tag of $7.2 trillion after pensions, VA bills, and other long-term costs are included. The American people are receiving 0 long-term strategic advantages from this policy. Indeed, here at home, we are also forced to pay for homeland security costs because of this Christian crusade against Islam that is bankrupting our country, while China takes advantage of our religious preoccupation to further their interests in the Pacific. The United States has never and will never be able to be a dominant force in Central Asia. But for the last 150 years, we have been the dominant force in the Pacific. This has been essentially the heart and anchor of our empire, and we are in danger of losing it to China because of this religious preoccupation, this religious crusade of Christianity against Islam, which our founders said should never happen in this country. We are not a Christian nation. We are a secular nation under law and our Constitution.
Any other public comment? Any other public comment? Entertain a motion in minutes of the study session for August 7th. Have a motion and support. Any questions, additions, or changes? Seeing or hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Michigan Indigent Defense Commission Implementation Plan.
Good morning. We've been notified by the state that monies will be available starting October 1st for reimbursements for our Indigent Defense Commission plan. We have met with stakeholders to get working and moving forward with our plan, including creating office space for the new individuals that will be hired. And we will be requesting as part of this implementation plan to fill the 6 positions that are grant funded within this plan. We were notified last week by MIDC at the state level that payments will be a 20% down payment to us come October, and then it will be quarterly reimbursements after that. So we'll get a 20% down payment, and then quarterly payments for reimbursements so we'll have to track our fees or our utilization. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I've attached some of the information. The standards 5 through 8 are scheduled to be implemented in October of 2019. I do not have a date yet on when the plans will be submitted annually. They have not given us that information yet, so there's still some unanswered questions that we have for MIDC at the state level. I'm looking for final approval, obviously go through the committee, and then final approval at the board at the Tuesday night meeting.
Commissioner Howell.
I won't be here Monday for committee meeting. We've got training on the new radio system. I'll just make a couple of comments here, though. I voted against this plan last time, and I'll be voting against it again. I'm not necessarily encouraging other commissioners to, but, and it's for several reasons. First of all, and Deb, if you can address this, it's not in the document, I don't think, but is there a plan by the state to claw back part of the reimbursement that we get for defense of criminals?
The only information I have is there was a proposal. I don't know the status of it. There was a proposal at the state level to reclaim 10% of court collections for court-appointed attorneys, but I have not seen any updated information on that.
So if that happens, and I would guess that it probably will in some form, then it is in fact costing us money, and I think that makes it in part an unfunded mandate. I'm also opposed to it because of the fact that it'll be establishing, if I read it right, defense counsel at arraignments. Is that accurate?
That is one of the mandates that the state has placed on everyone, is to have an arraignment attorney or an attorney at arraignment for indigent individuals.
That in and of itself doesn't bother me, but the fact is that we don't have prosecutors there, nor can we afford to, in my opinion, with the current budget, to address bond, and that's one of the things that the defense counsel will be addressing is bond for accused, and there will be no one from the prosecutor's office to represent. I think if I understand it right, there's the potential for a recommendation or someone making the case that it's going to be cheaper in the long run to establish our own new county office and have these attorneys as employees. I don't like us being pushed to do that, and I don't support that. Lastly, one of the things that I read in the document that was provided spoke to, I'm working from memory, not the document in front of me, but us paying for investigations, and it spoke to the need for that to happen regardless if a defendant has pled guilty or not. And I just think that's an unwise expenditure of resources in one small part. So when it comes up, I likely will be voting no on it. But again, I won't be here at committee Mondays, so I wanted to at least make these points. Thank you.
I would just add to that, my most recent budget discussion with the prosecutor's office, he did indicate that he believes that this, too, is an unfunded mandate, and that there's an expectation that his office will now provide attorneys at arraignment. And his current staff, he believes that he's not staffed and able to do that, will need additional support to do that. So we originally had some money in there for that purpose, but the state forced us to remove it. So we shall see.
One last comment, if I can. It's bothersome to me that it's forcing us into really financing both sides of criminal cases. You know, we're financing prosecution of those accused, and we're also having to now, at least in part the county have to pay for the defense of those accused. And that's bothersome to me, and it doesn't necessarily make it a fair or level playing field, for instance, with representation at bond hearings. So, thank you.
Further questions? Any other comments? Sarah?
We've had lots and lots and lots of discussions on this with our county organization in Lansing. I agree with you, Dave, on the unfunded mandate portion of this. And it's no different than the child care fund. And the unfortunate thing is, our legislators didn't see it that way, and somehow they just keep pushing these things on us and pushing them on us. So I can tell you that our organization is still advocating for the next section of it, especially for the funding portion, because we all know that it still is going to cost us money, even though they say it's covered and it's reimbursed. So we'll see how it goes, but in the meantime, you know, there's times that we have public comment in Lansing, and Dave, you really, really should go.
Chair, can I ask one more question of Mike or Deb? Can you update, or is there any change in the Oakland County fight on this? I think they've been appealing. Is it still on appeal? And it might be worthwhile to update the committee on Monday if there's more news.
I just read an article last week, I believe it was in Oakland, I forget what their local paper is or their county paper, but they are continuing their appeal. They're looking for the Supreme Court to take up the case, but they are continuing the appeal, so.
More news a week from yesterday. Go ahead, Mike.
Let's see, next up we have the Lifeways, and I believe we have Mary Beth.
So good morning, Commissioners. So just give me a second to pull up my PowerPoint. You have a full PowerPoint presentation in your packet, and that was presented to my board. I will not go over the entire presentation because that takes about an hour. So I do have a condensed version, so let me pull it up. So I'm here today to give you some background so that I can bring to the committee meetings next week the proposal relative to seeking a bond for capital renovations that are needed for the Lifeways building. First thing to give some background is that Lifeways back in 2006 purchased the 1200 Northwest Avenue building. At that time, we did purchase it with a bond with the county with 5 group homes for $7 million. We sold off the for-profit side of the building, as you might recall, back in around 2000, I think it was about 2012, 2013, when I became CEO. We learned about the challenges we were faced relative to the local match and relative to the for-profit side of the building contributing to the deficit, and got out of the landlord business and sold that portion of the building. So we just have the for-profit side of the building. We did refinance in 2014 that portion of the building, and we also obtained in 15 a bond for capital improvements for the roof. We had water coming in many places in the building at the time. So on this slide, you'll see where we are relative to our current bonds. So why is it that we are, and that's probably the biggest question to answer, is why is it that we are in the point of needing to pursue a bond for capital improvements? As a community mental health, we cannot utilize, we have to have local dollars to be able to do that, and to make capital improvements, or you pursue a bond in partnership with your county, like many community mental healths do. And we are in that position where we do need to make some renovations to the building. Since 2014, when the state of Michigan, and I've talked about this here before, when they changed the business model for community mental health and went from, we were a prepaid inpatient health plan, and all we primarily did was manage the care for individuals in Hillsdale and Jackson County. We had to change our business model. And at that time, we had 35 employees, and we were primarily a managed care entity authorizing and approving services, and we contracted all services out. Since that time, we have changed our business model, and where we really manage the care for individuals. And you'll see here on this slide the significant change since 2014 relative to the services that we provide. We are now a community mental health organization that provides services with the primary focus on diversion out of inpatient and the expansion of crisis services. So when we purchased the building in 2014 as a managed care entity who primarily contracted everything out, the building is designed as office space and is not conducive to the type of work that our business model has evolved to. So this shows you the growth of employees over the last several years as well, and that is because we are directly providing case management, psychiatric services, crisis services, access services directly at Lifeways. With the future of how healthcare is evolving and will continue to evolve, and it is part of our strategic plan and has been a part of our strategic plan now for many years, since probably 2012, is around integrating healthcare. And we've done an evolution relative to that. We have partnered with the Center for Family Health, and you'll see that in your packet, a letter of support from them as well relative to partnering with them to provide primary care. We need to evolve our system to bring in primary care within the community mental health organization. Healthcare is also changing from a volume-based care to a value-based care, and really trying to ensure that you are doing things to drive down the cost of care. Continuing to expand the types of crisis services that we provide and are providing in partnership even with the Health Improvement Organization here in Jackson around crisis diversion will allow us to continue to drive down the cost of providing care. Our facility, like I mentioned, when we purchased it, we were a managed care entity. Our business model has evolved, and we are providing direct services, and the space is not conducive of that. And if you look in your packet, you'll actually see some of the pictures of the internal layout of the organization and understand that why it is challenging at this point in time. We do plan to move to a point where we have 24/7 behavioral health access as a point of access to divert people out of our jails and to divert people out of the emergency room. This is a map of the building and the layout. of the building relative to the different areas, and we've been working through a concept drawing relative to what it would look like to remodel the building to meet the needs of our integrated health efforts. We are requesting option 3 there, really looking at the entire building if we're going to pursue this. We are seeking a $6.2 million bond. This gives you a projection of what the repayment of those bonds would be. At the time that we did this, we looked at a 3.75% and a 4.25% bond rate over a 15 or 20 year. What's important to note relative to the bond projections is the question about how do you pay that back. As a community mental health, like I stated very early on, we can use our Medicaid dollars to pay back the bond. And if you see here, this was this current year relative to our fiscal budget, $64 million. Again, this was in 18, so we're just finalizing our fiscal year 19's budget, and it has gone up relative to Medicaid and Health in Michigan. And we are allowed to utilize our Medicaid and Health in Michigan, and that is where the majority of the funds would come from. It's from Healthy Michigan and Medicaid, and the fact that we can do that we can depreciate that against our Medicaid costs versus having to come up with the local dollars to do so. You know, it is the right time for us as an organization to invest in our community. We are moving forward relative to integrated health, our partnership with the Center for Family Health, and them being on site currently. But co-location doesn't mean true integration unless we truly embed them with how we operate within our psychiatric unit, and they are a part of the treatment team, and that their clinical primary care offices are embedded within our psychiatric unit. Right now, they're in the back corner of the building. They're not truly embedded with how we provide services, and that is how we want to move forward as an organization. And when you look at Section 298 and what the intent of Section 298 is, it is around integrating primary health care, physical health care, and really it's about the goal of reducing costs. And we believe we can continue to do that with our partnership with the Center for Family Health as we move forward. So I know there was a lot of information he said at a very short, brief period of time. All of the slides are included. What is important to note as well is that we did do an analysis because there was a lot of question about, as an organization, to evaluate the pros and cons of integrating and finding a location off-site from where we currently are. And you will see an analysis of that in your packet relative to us looking at the cost of renting versus the cost of us investing in the building that we are currently in, and the cost against Medicaid and the ability for us to depreciate that over the course of the capital improvement. So I will leave open now for questions of any of the commissioners.
Dave?
Mayor, but just one question.
Yes.
I got that pie chart open with the budget, and if I heard you right, your intended funding source to pay for the bonds is a Medicaid funding and the Healthy Michigan funding?
Yes.
Primarily?
Yeah, primarily, it does come across, I will say that it does come across all of our buckets, but because 97% of our funding is Healthy Michigan and Medicaid, that is where the majority of the funding will come from.
So is there any risk of either of those things changing in the future?
One of the things that you'll see in one of the slides that I didn't pull up was relative to we've seen an increase, and because of our regionalization that we've had with Mid-State Health Network, we've seen an increase in our funding over the last several years relative to Medicaid, and we've been in a position over the last 3 years of having to send about 3.2 million back this year, and last year 3.6 million, I believe. It's in the presentation. So every year we're ending up sending money back when we can utilize those dollars to actually invest in services here locally.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Doctor.
Mary Beth, when you
Yes,
had this, you listed the comorbidities on the side.
yes.
And what I'm interested in is, are you treating those comorbidities along with the psychiatric problems, or together, or separately, or is the Center for Family Health dealing with the primary care aspect of this?
Well, what we currently are doing, we are trying to address it. I think the challenge is, like I talked about earlier, co-locating doesn't mean true integration. And we want to be able to bring them and embed them within how we deliver care, so that in the event that you have a psychiatrist who's meeting with a patient and sees that there might be an issue relative to, say, diabetes, and they're not taking their medication, they can directly refer them and have the medical individual come right into the appointment and be able to provide immediate intervention to address those physical health care concerns. I think the challenge right now is they're not necessarily within how we operate as an organization, but that is the future of how, and again, they are going to be partners with us on this as the Center for Family Health. But we will be addressing all of those types of issues that are listed. And you can see relative to our population, there's a high percent of individuals that have comorbid physical health conditions that we need to be able to address.
So will you be having those primary care doctors in your facility?
Yes.
Stationed there?
Yeah, our design actually, our concept relative to primary care would be a unit that is both physical health care and behavioral health within the same area, where you can directly interact, team talk about patients, and be able to provide both physical and behavioral health care at the same time.
One last question. Does that compete with the Center for Family Health? And
No,
No.
I would say no, because we deal with the population, we deal with the chronically mentally ill population. So it is a different population. They're already partnering with us. You see a letter of support from them relative to their partnership and moving forward with this model.
okay, thank you.
Have we done any further questions? I have a couple. Has
Yes.
Rick been involved with you on the building itself? physical
Yes,
plan?
yes.
Rick, does this property look like it's a sustainable property going forward for the next 25 to 50 years with this remodel?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so we're not just putting a Band-Aid on an older building. I'm just concerned that we're putting money after a building that was built in the 1960s, and I want to make sure that it's not going to have a whole lot of chronic problems if we're moving walls around and everything else inside it.
Well, when we, sorry.
It's okay?
When we put the new roof on it, it really helped to extend the life expectancy of that building. The building itself is in good shape. It was well maintained by Jacobson's, and because the heating and cooling is all done primarily through rooftop units, most of those have been replaced. We still have some of the older ones up there, but again, those are maybe $10,000 or $15,000 each to replace, based on the life cycle of the units. We're also updating the electrical system in that building this year, actually, so we'll be in good shape.
Service to the building, access to everything's in good shape or not?
Yes.
Okay. Further questions? Thanks, I guess we'll see you at committee.
Yep. See you Monday.
Mike?
Next up, we have the 911 Dispatch Communication Center discussion. I'll kick it off by saying that, we were asked to take a good look at it and determine what was possible, what was legal, what would be the steps and requirements to transfer control, if you will, to the administrative side of the equation. And we have consulted with Bonnie Toski and her firm. They've laid it out for us. In all honesty, it's It's a matter of putting together a committee that would provide advisory information to administration, and just a motion of the board. It's pretty straightforward, simple. I didn't realize it was quite that simple when I first looked at it. But it is, as I think the white paper or the staff report speaks for itself, and I will leave it to any of you who would like to chime in as to some of the reasons and challenges that caused you to make such a request of me.
Well, if I could, Dave. The conversation started back when Adam Brown was here, and we began looking at co-location and cooperation with two other counties. When we were attempting to, at the time, put together a tri-county 911 center. And some of the different obstacles we found were that each administrative organization was run in different ways in each county, with Lenawee County moving towards, at the time, towards a dispatch committee. And we looked at the model tentatively then, and have continued to look at it over the last couple of years since Mike's come on board, and felt that it was time that we bring it to the board to actually have a further discussion on it. That kind of give you a history of where we're at with this discussion. It goes back quite a few years. It's not something that that just came up recently, so everyone's aware of that. Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to address a couple of things on it. First of all, I am supportive of this plan, and in the staff report that was prepared, I think it lays out pretty clearly that the employees there are already employees of the county. And really what this plan does is switches oversight of 911 to the administrator's office, and allows for the administrator or whoever he decides to oversee that. And I appreciate the comments from the undersheriff earlier, but this is nothing about really the radio project that we did, that he's done a great job in oversight of. I think that would have happened regardless of who was overseeing the dispatch center. I'm pretty supportive of all the documents I see here. One of the things that I don't like, that I would ask that they change before it comes to us, is in the bylaws. I think it's on page 5, where it talks about board members being able to vote by phone or attend the meeting by phone. I'm not supportive of that, and I don't think we should allow that. And I think that's as simple as a wording change to mandate that members be present to attend the meeting, not do it by phone. There's also a page numbering problem. You've got page 6 to 5 on the last page. But overall, I reviewed the documents. I am supportive of the plan. 38 years in law enforcement here in this community, I'm very supportive of this plan. I think it would give all agencies more fair and open access to dispatch. This advisory committee, if you read through the documents, you'll see that they're subject to the Open Meetings Act. Recommendations and issues would be publicly discussed, most of them anyway. Certainly not personnel issues, I don't think. And it's a plan that does, in my opinion, move things forward in our county for both police, fire, and emergency services. And I'll be supportive of the plan with some minor changes. Thank you.
Other questions? Sarah?
So I think when I first came on the board, this popped up, and I guess I was kind of surprised to see it on here just this month, and for us to maybe potentially take action. I know it's no different than any item of business. It gets on study session, we go through the committee, and it takes action, but I feel like this is one of those issues I'd like to take more time on and not necessarily vote on this month. Because in my mind, when we explored this a few years ago, and I know things change, but when we explored it, then it seemed like nothing happened, so it was dead to me, I guess, at the time. And other than, you know, the public issues we've had recently, I guess I don't know of any major issues that warrant something like this. Me personally, as just, general public, I like knowing that the people who work in this every day are the people running it. So that's just my first gut feeling about it. But otherwise, I would just ask that we take more time for this particular issue to just explore and talk to different people in different counties. I would feel more comfortable with that.
Commissioner Rice?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For myself, I certainly expect that we will do this. In fact, I know we'll do this. To me, it's going to be important to look at the current functions and the efficiency of our 911 to help us determine whether or not our 911 service is truly providing what's necessary for the safety of the public and the safety of the first responders. Because to me, that's what it really comes down to. If we have a current system that is providing what's needed, again, for our public and our first responders, obviously that's what we want. If we have a system that's not providing what it needs or is not efficient or safety enough, then obviously that's what we have to seek out as commissioners, because it is our responsibility to make sure that we can provide the best for our taxpayers and for the public in general. So to me, once we look at all those variables, to me that should give us the answer. Thank you.
Further questions? So it appears here in study session, and I ask that you get with the administrator's office and get your questions answered, and it doesn't need to come forward this month, but it needs to begin the discussion, so, okay? Any further thoughts? Mike?
And our last order of business today, we have the sheriff's mid-year report. Under Sheriff.
Good morning. I wasn't able to make the August target of the mid-year report because I had a number of deliverables regarding the radio system that need to be completed, as I still do. So I appreciate your leniency in letting me do it this month, especially at study session. We have the training for the 800 megahertz radio system that starts on Monday, which would conflict with the committee. Again, inmate statistics, not significantly different, although the ADP, the average daily population, is clicking upward just ever so slightly. Again, this is only mid-year, so we'll take a look at that when we come back. It appears that individuals are being incarcerated for longer periods of time pre-trial. It's not that we have a lot of new arrestees coming in or a significantly different amount of intakes. Video arraignment, again, a safety and time saver for us. The court is utilizing that a little bit heavier, and we do appreciate that. Medical calls and nurses' calls, not significantly different. CMH visits, obviously we now have our staff from Lifeways in the jail. We did have a little bit of hiccup at mid-year, but we have a new individual in there, and they appear to be working very well, and that is a much-needed revision in our practices, and they are certainly getting their day's work. A lot of people that want to see the CMH provider, if nothing else, just to talk, and the ability to have Lifeways there to continue the transition of plans as those people leave jail, because we are a short-stay facility. A lot of these people are clients that maybe they have already seen Lifeways, or in a lot of cases we're finding they are probably potential clients that maybe have never seen Lifeways, so they're able to coordinate care upon their release. You're obviously all aware that we signed a new contract with our food provider using the RFP process the county put into place. That went very seamless, and that is the same provider that came in with the low bid that we currently have, so there's no disruption or changes to our operations. And we do have some remodels going on regarding the video visits, and that's kind of helping the public convenience with the video visits and having that spot down on Wesley Street where they can come do the video visits should they choose to. And again, we continue to roll out the camera system, the digital camera system that the county provided about 1.5 years ago. That was not a complete transition from the old non-IP based cameras. We continue to replace those as money and time allows, gives us a lot of greater coverage in a lot more areas. We're able to go back and review things. I can think of at least 5 incidents where we're able to play back the tape and look at the individual who we felt was maybe trying to bring contraband into the jail or was potentially trying to pass contraband to the other inmates by watching them on the camera. Again, we try to do whatever we can to recover cost and fees. I know the issue of incarceration fees came up both through this board and statewide sometime earlier this year. We do attempt to recover incarceration fees and medical fees. We try to assess a copay for our inmates just like we would anybody else who wants to see a doctor or nurse or an ER. But obviously those people aren't always able to pay. We do attempt to seek that once they get out of jail, but it's usually just a request, and beyond that, there's not much else that we can do. Our actual recovery is very low, less than 5% of what we actually are due in incarceration fees and medical fees versus what we recover. State billings and diverted felon billings and parole billings, they continue to be steady. They have not decreased those or offset those in any way, so that continues to be a positive impact for the county jail operations. About 13,000 incidences dispatched thus far, a little under 1,200 purchase permits for firearms. That seems to be rising every year. And again, we process about a little over 2,500 FOIA requests that come in through our front window, whether it be for police reports, video, body cam video, etc. Those numbers kind of speak for themselves. Some of the major cases that we've had 2 homicides this year. Both are actively under investigation. Yes.
May I ask a question for that, traffic stops? Is still traffic stops the number one way that we begin investigations?
I would say it's pretty significant, and that is the number one way that we have contact with people, although our calls for service continue to rise every year, so those are probably getting very close to, but not every traffic stop results in some type of criminal investigation. Certainly it's our highest point and number one point of contact for citizens. As far as contraband being uncovered or wanted individuals, yes, that is the most common way, only because typically if someone is summoning us for police service or responding somewhere for police service, they know that we're coming or they have an idea that we're coming. Traffic stops are usually, what we refer to as a cold contact, and that's where a number of contraband, weapons, drugs, and wanted individuals are found, and that would be the most primary way still.
Thanks.
And both the homicides still under investigation shortly after the first of the year in January 2018 in Parma Township on Athena Drive. And then our most recent homicide on Fisherville Road in Grass Lake Township. That was the large party that kind of went awry and wound up with the loss of a young man's life that we continue to actively investigate. In both of these cases, the Major Crimes Task Force, that's the detectives from all the various agencies, including the state police and their crime lab assets, responded and assisted us on this. We do still receive tips from time to time, and we are still actively seeking information on both these cases. JNET, obviously our multi-jurisdictional team that we partner with the state police and the city police on. These are their numbers for the first 6 months of the year. Some of their major cases, they continue to seize large amounts of what I refer to as hard drugs, cocaine, heroin. We're seeing a bit of a resurgence of methamphetamines there's new advanced procedures for making methamphetamine versus the old large labs that we used to see. A more refined one-pot method where they make single or lower doses of methamphetamine. That's beginning to resurge, whether it's from the cooks getting out of prison that were kind of previously incarcerated in the first round of when this really blew up in the early 2000s, or whether this is just more refined methods. We're still digging into that. Fentanyl is obviously the other part of this. Fentanyl is the drug that they cut up heroin with that gives a little bit more of an extreme high, and we're beginning to see larger quantities of this and begin to seize larger quantities of this, and this is very concerning and scary for first responders because it can have very detrimental and lethal effects to first responders who touch it because it is absorbed through the skin. Our volunteers, obviously a large part of the county fair and the faster horses and NASCAR races. We couldn't do it without them. They've put in a good number of hours this year, both the reserve deputies and the mounted division, which are part of our reserve. And then we have a couple other volunteers that enter things for us, primarily gun permits and logging gun permits and helping at the front window. Emergency management, you've probably all seen the emails, maybe even you're tired of the emails, but we're, over the last couple years, have been doing a number of training courses. As I spoke at a meeting recently, active shooter training continues to be one of our most sought after assets. We have a number of private industries and public industries asking for that type of real hands-on training, and we've been doing that as we are able. Again, we just conducted active shooter training for Vandercook, Northwest, East Jackson, Michigan Center, and Grass Lake, just before the start of their school year this year. Statewide tornado drill and weather preparedness back in April, a number of tabletop exercises, and we did work with the fair staff over the summer prior to the fair, kind of helping them with their emergency response plan and updating that emergency response plan. We did do a tabletop exercise with them, and that kind of regarded a weather event, which they were probably most likely to see at the fair, and we helped the staff understand what their primary concerns were, what they should do, where they should move people. It's been about a day and a half out there with them kind of going through that, and that was very well received by the fair staff. Continue to roll out some of the things that we have that were previously approved by this board, maybe over the last couple of years. The Knox boxes, which are a universal access for law enforcement to access school buildings in the event of a type of terror situation or active shooter situation. Our Code Red system, which the board initially approved about 2 years ago, was renewed again, and we continue to use that. And we sent out a number of warnings on that, which I'll show you later here. These are just some of the courses that we've done with emergency management over the first 6 months, hosting them, offering tabletop, or offering these type of specific trainings to various individuals. And certainly you're all always invited to those, so if there's something that you see or something that you think you might want to participate in, please get a hold of us and we'll certainly accommodate a seat for you at the table. Some of the grant funds that flow in through the federal government and are distributed by the state of Michigan to the Emergency Management Office. These are Homeland Security grants that go to the purchase of equipment for firefighters or police officers or projects that are put forth by other individuals. And the middle line there, the 37,144, that is what the county receives in exchange for the costs that are incurred by the emergency management operation budget, the personnel cost and benefits of the individual in that unit. And then also there's an additional $1,000. Our hazardous material HMEP grant, Hazardous Materials Emergency Planning Grant, that's something we have to update each and every year. It deals with chemicals and hazardous materials, who has them, where are they at, what's the locations, where those things are stored, and we have to update that every year and provide that to the state, and in exchange for that, we get that $1,000 stipend, which goes into the budget. As I talked about earlier, Code Red mass notifications, these are some of the things that that $74,000 were spent on. County urban search and rescue shoring equipment, some ballistic shields for the special response team, and some emergency operations center upgrades, monitors, phones, projectors, displays, phone switch, all things that IT helped us out with and was able to coordinate that for all of us. The gas mask project, which you approved, the complex coordinated attack vest, which is essentially a heavy exterior vest that first responders could put in if they encountered rifle fire that would potentially stop that. Henry Ford Allegiance Health had a trauma trainer project that was funded by that. Blackman Leone's mobile fingerprint scanner, and then the various fire departments throughout the county, their rescue task force equipment. We've been coordinating with these active shooter exercises with Central Dispatch and having them conduct part of the training as well, because they're going to receive these mass calls. We instituted that about 1.5 years ago. So they've been coordinating with these active shooter exercises so they can get a real world feel about how that's going to go down and some of the calls they're going to receive. We've processed out at dispatch alone about 103 freedom of information requests, and that is typically requests for call logs or requests for phone recordings or radio traffic. And we participate in a couple functions with school districts and the Girl Scouts about how young people should use 911, what that would look like, how they would contact 911, questions are going to be asked, how they would find their location, how to use a cell phone when contacting 911, those type of things. And we are proud to announce that 2 more fire departments have joined the mutual aid box alarm system. This was requested about a year and a half ago by fire departments to kind of move towards that MABUS system. We've been slowly working that way. Of course, that's a decision those regional fire departments have to make. And essentially what that does is it utilizes fire resources or fire departments, not necessarily based on jurisdiction, but based on closest location of assets. And I'll give you the example. For instance, you can have a fire in Liberty Township on the south side of Kimmel Road, but perhaps Summit Station Fire Department Station 1 is closer. Assets would be sent from that location versus Liberty. Obviously, Liberty would still go, but it's asset-driven, not jurisdiction-driven. We're continuing to upgrade the phone system to bring texting to Jackson County 911 by the end of the year. We just completed a significant milestone in that work just about a week and a half ago. We've been requested through law enforcement agencies to conduct 60 different cell phone pings, which is locating the cell phones. That's locating those phones based on a current urgent need of potential loss of life. Obviously, there's certain court requirements and certain search warrants that are required to get further data, but if we can show the phone company that there's a drastic urgent need to locate this individual based on their life or the protection of another individual, then we are able to do that. And so far, all of our communication technicians have exceeded the current training standards set forth by the state. These are just the call for service numbers. I'll remind you that these are the numbers that come through Central Dispatch. Some agencies have their own computer-aided dispatching system where they might enter their own calls, so they may have additional calls. These are only calls routed through 911 dispatch. So you may find some discrepancies in other departments. And then I thought I'd throw this in here towards the end here. So as we continue our march towards the 800 megahertz communication system, some kind of major milestones. The Nokia microwave system was activated and tested, became visible at the state's NCC, that's the Communications Monitoring Center in Lansing, on the 18th and the 19th. That Friday before, we worked well late into the night trying to get the microwaves activated. We took them back offline Friday night, came back in Saturday morning. We were able to refire those microwaves, make some adjustments, and late in the night on Saturday, they began to show up and they were visible on the state system, which means that all of the firewalls and all the requisite things we had done at the tower sites were correct and were speaking to the state system. The fire pagers that you approved have been ordered and received by Row Communications, and they are beginning to be programmed. The field user equipment is undergoing programming and will probably be complete here in the very near future. So I'm talking about the handheld radios and the in-vehicle radios. We, of course, have training next week, the 10th through the 13th. This will be a 4-day course, full day each day. We're going to train a number of individuals. I've been coordinating since about June with police and fire departments about who they want to send. These individuals will be certified as trainers on the state system. They will then go back to their own department and train the end users how to use this new equipment. All the towers are energized and the lighting is turned on. I know that we have received a couple complaints early on that the towers were not lit. We had the appropriate FCC permits to have what's called a dark tower, meaning the FCC knew they were there and knew they were not energized, but all the lighting and energy was turned on for those back towards the middle of August. And all of our work, antennas, microwaves, lighting, cabling, etc., they're all completed, including all the state-owned sites. We had to remediate one state-owned site and basically strengthen the tower. So we still have a number of significant deliverables and milestones to still hit here in about the next 45 days, and a lot of those things are going to be very critical. I think we're still on track for doing that. One of our longest processes is going to be the field acceptance testing, which was targeted for late September and beginning of October. That is where we're going to actually fire the system live. We're going to go out and field test it in a very specific manner kind of organized by Motorola's engineers, and that's going to be a test for each quarter-mile segment of the county of Jackson, and we're measuring it in two different capacities, both with electronic equipment they're going to outfit cars with, and also a talk-in and talk-out test on the devices. Within that, there's no doubt we're going to incur some type of degraded service in certain areas, and when that happens, we're going to stop, go back, amend, refocus, change, adjust the system, whether we have to turn the power up, turn it down, et cetera. So that's going to be a very lengthy process, and then once that's done, that's kind of the largest last milestone is field acceptance testing. We do have one minor thing to correct at the tower sites, and we're waiting for that item to be shipped and received. It's essentially a power plant. We have a temporary solution right now which allows them to operate, but the towers couldn't operate in full capacity right now because of this temporary solution. But we'll have that resolved by the end of September, and from there, it's going to be the march into the user equipment, the deploying of the user equipment, and then the very labor-intensive portion, which is the installing of the mobile radios in the fire apparatuses and patrol cars.
Dave?
Chris, I again want to thank you for your work on the 800 system. It's, I'm sure, painstaking work, and you've done a great job with that. Looking forward, is anybody working on a plan for decommissioning the old system yet, even if it's just a paper plan for now?
Well, yes, we have looked forward to that. The number of things on the current system were bought typically in partiality by Homeland Security grants. So we're waiting for a response from FEMA and from the state of Michigan about how they want us to document that and where it goes. Typically, after 10 years of use, the federal government considers that to be its useful life. When you're talking communications equipment, a good majority of that has been in use for more than 10 years. So there's a number of things that I'm sure that we can indicate have served its useful life. We were in contact with Rural Communications about any other individuals who may be using a similar VHF system who may want to acquire the significant or most costly assets of our VHF system. There's a couple sites that we're going to have to leave up and on because the Department of Transportation has equipment on them that operates a portion of their system. I have spoke with the director a couple different times about moving on to the 800 megahertz system and whether he's interested in that. But for the immediacy, they'll need to leave at least 2 of those sites up and operational because it carries their equipment. So essentially, once we get going and get fully tested and fully vetted and we know the system is operational and we don't have to take it down to make any adjustments, meaning the 800 megahertz system, we're going to begin selectively shutting down those sites, mothballing some of the easier things like the generators, the things that won't be needed anymore, and then of course we'll have to start the process of taking down the old equipment and getting some of those towers offline.
Chris, if I remember right, the road department went to a UHF system. Is that what's on the towers, or UHF equipment, I think?
It's still VHF.
Oh,
UHF is what the city was on and moved to VHF, a couple years ago, 3 years ago, moved to our system.
And if we end up having to keep a couple of tower sites, we certainly can hand those over to the road department, I would assume, in the expense of them?
Yes, and we don't have any significant cost or future expenses with any of the existing towers. It's just the monthly maintenance, the energy costs, and of course the preventative maintenance on the generators, but of course they won't be used for a public safety standpoint, so we won't have to meet the quarterly preventative maintenance on the backup power, that type of stuff to, kind of certify the system. So there are some abilities to save some money, but the costs are not significant.
Thank you.
Doctor?
Chris, now that you have someone coming to the jails to take care of people in crisis, does that decrease the number of emergency room visits? You had 53 on here. Has that decreased that number?
It has not impacted the emergency room visits because typically the ER visits are for injuries or actual medical issues that the jail doctor says this person needs to go see the ER treatment for various issues. What it has decreased pretty significantly was our suicidal precautions. In the past, so let's use the analogy, on Saturday we got somebody in and they said, I'm suicidal or I'm having mental health issues, or maybe we saw they had a history of mental health issues and their behavior as assessed by the intake officer was to some degree concerning. We would take that and put that individual into a suicidal precaution just to err on the side of caution. We have a situation now where those suicidal precautions are being significantly decreased, or the time within suicidal precaution is being significantly reduced because CMH is able to come in very quickly, talk to this individual, develop a treatment plan. And part of this Stepping Up for Mental Health initiative that I know that you've all heard about and that Lifeways and Commissioner Leitner is very actively involved in, along with Commissioner Rice, is this kind of benchmark training for our intake officers, a universal training so they can recognize and see what some of these mental health crises look like, and also individuals who may not acknowledge they're having a mental health crisis. So we're moving towards that model where we can have this kind of definitive training and this universal scorecard that the state knows has worked in other areas because they've done it, they've documented it, they've revised it, and that's kind of all part of that greater plan. But yes, ER visits are typically medical in nature, but the suicidal precautions and the suicidal incidences have significantly decreased.
One other question is, when you talked about the number of pings, okay, or how long it takes to identify a cell phone. So if I have someone out in the country, Pulaski, who calls 911, they're having a heart attack and then he's just passed out and the phone is lying there, how long does it take for you to identify where that phone is going through the program that you listed there? I mean, can somebody get there fast, or is it going to take hours?
So two separate issues. The issue that I was talking about in the PowerPoint, or a ping, what we refer to as a ping, or let's say we're going to locate a phone. That's more of a situation where, let's say Columbia Township Police goes to take a call of Johnny, who is suicidal. He told his mother and father he was going to kill himself, and he left the house and they have no idea where he is. If we have his phone number and we have his provider, which we can usually obtain, we can contact that telecommunications company and say, we believe, based on the facts and a statement from law enforcement, that this person is in grave danger to himself or to others. We would like you to locate this phone. And the company, assuming the phone is on, will abstract the data from this phone, telling us where exactly it's at or within a geographical area. The situation you're talking about is location data that comes in from your phone when you contact 911. If you've contacted 911 and the strength of the network is sufficient, meaning that you're at least on a 3G but preferably 4G platform, and you have location abilities or GPS abilities enabled on your phone, we will be able to see your location within a broad range. Typically, it's in an urban area about a quarter of a block. It can be a little bit wider in a remote area because it's using the triangulation of cell phone towers to calculate that data. And when you're out in a remote area, it has less ability to triangulate off towers because there's less towers available. So, two separate issues. If your phone is enabled, you have the sufficient network and sufficient capacity through the system. If you call 911 relatively quickly within, let's say, 45 to 60 seconds, we can typically find your location data within a proximity. But that all depends on the network and a lot of ands. There's a lot of possibilities within that. What I was talking about is locating a wanted or perhaps endangered individual who did not contact 911, but the law enforcement's trying to find.
Okay. Thank you.
John?
Chris, I had a couple questions for you, if you don't mind. And they're not all within the report itself, but just if you could educate me a little bit on so I recognize that municipalities will contract with the county sheriff's department for added presence or for their policing. How does the city deal with the county in that regard? Are there, for example, I mean, obviously when I'm thinking about our constituency, I'm thinking about the city, I'm thinking about some of the data that you put forward, and a lot of it seems to be happening within the city itself. So do you adjust the team around, I mean, for example, is there a greater presence within the city given that this is where there are issues, or do we spread it out throughout the countywide because you're a county department? If you could educate me on that, I'd appreciate it.
Well, we don't directly patrol the city. Obviously, our office is in the city, and eventually there will be violations that are detected or situations where we come across incidences on our way to and from. We don't actively or directly patrol the city unless it's at the request of the city police, which have occurred. They ask for our assistance from time to time, whether it be they're trying to combat what they see to be a highly violent area and they want suppression patrols. But typically that is a conversation that occurs with us and the state police. The state police has a far greater depth of resources than we do. What we do to aid the city police is obviously we have a number of cooperatives, both with the detectives, the special response team, evidence, the 911 center. I mean, we can go on and on. But If the city becomes so burdened that they're not able to answer their calls for service, let's say they're on a major crisis or a major case, such as a shooting or something like that, we will then, in conjunction with the state police, send our cars into the city to answer those calls for service, so there's people not waiting for hours on end. And then we, of course, aid them at the scenes of violent incidences where they request our assistance or need our assistance, whether it be with a significant traffic crash like we had recently. We conducted the accident investigation for them. That's part of our cooperative with them, is that we have the abilities and the technology to do that. We've offered those services to them. So we work in conjunction with them, but we rely on them to request things from us or request services for us, and then we're happy to assist them anytime.
Is there, in your estimation, is that a good relationship? Is it one where it's not siloed? In other words, the city reaches out, has good communication, regular basis, lets you know what's going on, you let them know what's going on?
Absolutely. I talk with Chief Hitt probably weekly, if not more often than that. We're on a number of committees together. He is never hesitant to reach out. As a matter of fact, I spoke with him Saturday morning about an incident they had in the city of Jackson late Friday night, early Saturday. So we're always happy to assist them in whatever capacity that we have, both with major events and other things that they may have going on, but we rely on them to kind of guide us as far as what they need. They do have a pretty adequate police force, but as you probably well know, from many years ago, they have a significantly less number of officers than they did, trying to deal with the same population. So,
Thanks, Chris. A second question, and this one may not be in your wheelhouse, but regarding the emergency management system, does that deal with severe weather as well, or is that municipality by municipality or out of Grand Rapids, or?
yeah, so I mean, we're the recipient of, well, actually, the 911 Center would be the recipient of urgent weather warnings, and I'm sure I know what you're going right to, because I was a little bit surprised. If in that kind of situation where there's a advanced weather warning, the 911 Center would receive a secured confidential communication from the National Weather Service that tells them, we are issuing a tornado watch or severe thunderstorm warning, tornado warning, whatever it might be, for Jackson County. So on Friday night, we see that they had a tornado warning issued for southern Calhoun, and the storm was moving east-northeast at about 25 miles an hour. We were prepped to receive that tornado warning for Jackson County, assuming that's what would happen. That warning expired at about 8:15 p.m., and there was never even a watch or warning issued by National Weather Service. Severe thunderstorm warning was issued for Jackson County at about 7:53 p.m. that dispatch put out to all first responders, and I also got the notice. That severe thunderstorm watch expired at about 8:30 or 8:35 p.m. There's no other additional watches or warnings issued for Jackson County by the National Weather Service, but National Weather Service out of Grand Rapids, Michigan would be the one to issue watches and warnings, and we disseminate them. Obviously, the news does as well.
And then so when, do you have an idea as to when that tornado actually supposedly touched down? I mean, it was late into the evening or early into the morning, wasn't it, to my...
My impression would be it was later in the evening, around 9. We did receive communication, emergency management did, from National Weather Service on Saturday morning, because it happened Friday night, Saturday morning, saying that they were sending damage assessment teams to an area on the west end of the city for what they perceived to be a possible tornado touchdown, or at least a possible brush with a tornado. And they communicated that information back to emergency management, that they had damage that they believed to be consistent with a tornado, and that they were going to put that out to the media.
And I guess the concern is ultimately is that it was the first Saturday of the month, ironically, and the sirens went off as they do at 12 noon, and but there was, to my knowledge, there was no warning, local warning. Who makes that determination regarding the municipal sirens? Is that 911, is that emergency services, or is that something that municipality does?
If the 911 Center would have received a warning from the National Weather Service, they would have tripped a number of platforms. They would have tripped the outdoor weather warning sirens. They would have tripped a code red mass notification to any and all users and subscribers and any cell phones in that area. And then also they would have disseminated it via our radio system to police and fire units in the field that the National Weather Service was issuing a tornado warning, etc. This is how long it's going to be. Or if there was a confirmed sighting from a credible source, a weather spotter or a ground spotter, saying I have funnel cloud activity or I have rotational activity, that is the other way that those can be issued. We received neither of those.
Sure. And given the deluge of water coming down. My understanding is that oftentimes those tornado funnel clouds, impossible to see. It's just you can't see them. Even on radar, it becomes difficult to see with situations like that. So I understand the situation. I just want to make sure, if our technology is broken down or if our weather alert system is broken down, we would just want to make sure that, luckily, no one ultimately was hurt. It was property damage and the like, but nobody was ultimately hurt. But in a situation like that, it does shock you a little bit that it does concern you a little bit that the warnings weren't triggered and we had an actual tornado and supposedly, potentially, it actually touched down. So it's certainly something that, not necessarily from your end, but certainly with the National Weather Service, want to kind of have, I guess, a good understanding as to why that the series of protections weren't tripped. The other last question, and it really falls in line with both Commissioner Leitner and Commissioner Rice, regarding the 911. It concerns me when our officers, right, our law enforcement officers have concerns about the changes, and so, and it's discussionary at this point in time. But if there are concerns about how it would negatively impact safety, or how you believe the efficiencies would be damaged, so it would have a negative impact upon the system in whole, obviously, hopefully, certainly beyond the public comment, you'd be willing to get that out to us, just so we can consider that as we move forward on this change. And then, well, lastly, just one of the things that wasn't discussed, obviously, in the year-end report is the situation regarding our sheriff. And I just want to convey again that it as a county commissioner who, in the past, we've had this great relationship with the sheriff's department. It's just the feeling of the strain. It causes me pain, causes me concern. That just feels like we're not working as a team. You're professional, and the team's professional in terms of the sheriff notwithstanding, but the fact that we don't have that relationship with our sheriff causes great concern. And I'm looking forward to the time, one way or the other, where we can move forward with that. And if you wouldn't mind conveying that back to the sheriff, it just seems like we have one hand tied behind our back to some degree in our ability in our communications in moving the county in the direction that it needs to, particularly when it comes to issues of safety. Thanks.
Any other commissioner questions? I do. Chris?
Thank you for your time.
I have a question for you. Being just conservative, do you feel like we're going to meet the thresholds going forward with 800 megahertz? You feel comfortable we'll have everything all taken care of and we can meet the thresholds of the end of the year and everything looks good?
Yeah, we can
just being conservative.
We can definitely meet the timetable by the end of the year. Obviously, we're optimistic and we're hoping to be using the system wholeheartedly within the fall over the next couple months. Certainly hitting that milestone, which Motorola has to hit per their contract by December 31st. I'm not concerned about that. We're being very ambitious. I'll feel a lot better once September is done and I get all these significant deliverables off my back that have to be met. And once we do that, it'll largely be a process of testing and evaluating the system, making sure it hits the targets and the marks where it's supposed to within the county, providing the coverage that it says it's supposed to based on their coverage maps. And once we do that, then we're kind of into the final sign-off process where we can start deploying the system and we all know based on data that it's sufficient.
Thank you. Mike? Other items?
No, I don't have any other items.
Budget's coming along okay?
Budget's coming along fine.
Okay. Any further questions of the administration? We're adjourned. Oh, excuse me, public comment. I apologize. Public comment?
The transfer of administrative relationship for 911, obviously, it was a surprise to some of the commissioners to see it on the agenda today. And as Chairman Shotwell said, it is something that was considered before. The discussion was sort of dropped and it suddenly reappeared. I hope you all will do your due diligence. I appreciate Commissioner Williams asking the undersheriff to state specifically whatever concerns he might have had. I have a question, if someone could answer it under this. The employees who are currently working there will simply continue to work there, and it's only the oversight that's transferred to the new committee and to Michael as the administrator controller. Is that correct? All right, thank you.
Any other public comment? Seeing none, moved on to commissioner comments. Seeing none, we are adjourned.